Well, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to One Table.
Welcome.
We are here again, here with the fellas. Just before we get started, talking about what we're going to talk about today, let's introduce ourselves. I am Chris House. This is Justin, a.k.a. Juice. We call him the professor here at the table.
Yep.
We've got David, who we call the flow master
Yep.
here.
I guess.
And Fred.
Chris and I still don't have nicknames.
Still don't have names, man.
You got to help us out.
Please give us some names in the comments, something, so we can have some great titles like the two here.
We can,
Well, today we are in for an amazing conversation today, fellas. We are talking about the Derek Chauvin verdict, the sentencing, rather.
Yeah.
And we also are going to talk about Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Juneteenth is now a federal holiday in the United States as of this year. So hopefully you all are ready to join in this conversation.
Yeah.
Make sure you get comfortable, learn a few things, leave some comments too, so we'll know how to track with you and follow you. So David,
Yeah.
man, you got it, man. Take it
yeah,
away.
this is kind of just like what happens anyway, normal for us. Like
Yes.
when stuff is going down in the news or
Right.
people are talking about stuff on Facebook, like we tend to talk in the hallway
Yeah.
where we work at our church. And so we're just kind of bringing that here to the table,
Right.
our reactions. So, and then I guess first we should say we did record
Yeah.
a video about the Chauvin
Verdict.
Verdict, yeah.
which may be lost
It's
on a
not.
crash
It's
hard
coming.
drive.
It's coming.
We'll
But
see.
in
It's coming. It's
Jesus'
coming.
name,
It's coming.
it's you'll be able to watch that before you watch this, maybe.
Or we'll
Um,
drop it as a part one, part two.
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe
hopefully.
drop them both
Yeah, we'll
together.
see.
Hopefully
We'll start
that's
having
what we'll
patrons,
do.
and y'all can have that when you pay like $1. What is it?
Yes.
$1?
Right.
Yeah.
Once we find that, our Patreon
The
subscribers.
Patreon subscribers.
Say it right.
Exclusive. Right.
Exclusive content.
Anyway, we hope to get that to you, but in case we didn't, we all made predictions.
Yeah.
So we had kind of reacted to the verdict about a month ago, I guess, or a couple months ago now, to the Chauvin verdict. And we had made predictions about what the sentencing would be based on that verdict. If you remember, the verdict
Right.
was full on
Guilty.
all counts.
All counts.
Yeah, guilty on all counts, and we kind of reacted to that. I think all of us positively, just acknowledging that was something that was necessary and needed to be
Right.
done. So then, do you guys remember what your predictions were in terms of, based on those verdicts, what the sentencing would?
I don't remember my number. I think I said serious time.
Okay.
I think mine was more than 20, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I just remember the word significant.
Or more than 10. It might have been more than 10.
Significant.
I think most of us said significant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris, I think you had some reservations about
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
or not it would be serious
Oh
time.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I knew just in a little bit of research, I knew that because of the charges,
Yeah.
he would only be able to get a certain amount of time for that anyway. And if my
Because you only
memory
get
serves me
sentenced for the most serious crime.
right,
He was guilty of 3, but he's only
Right.
sentenced for the top one.
right.
But that top one had the potential to be 30 years, even with
Yes.
just that one by itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So he could have gotten 30 years, and what the judge gave him,
22 and a
22
half.
and a half,
22 and a half. Yeah.
which he'll probably only do 15 of those because he'll probably get good behavior because they're already putting him in well, not solitary confinement, but he's isolated by himself anyway. It's for his own protection. Of course, I have reservations with it
Yeah.
because he took a man's life. He murdered somebody,
Yeah.
and you only get. He could only be charged up to 30 or 40 years. Minneapolis has this. Minnesota, they have this thing in their law, like you can only be charged by receive a certain amount of time for a certain crime. We could get into that later if we start talking about that. But I think that's kind of a slap in the face because again, he murdered someone. You have people in jail right now who are in jail for life sentences for stealing jackets, or I know someone personally who's in jail who never had a record at all, and she was in a car wasn't even driving. She was in a car, and they were stopped by the police, and she was in the car with drug dealers, and they had large amounts of crack, and so she's in jail for, I think she's serving like a 60-year sentence. And she wasn't even, perfect record, nothing never happened to her before. So that's just a personal case I know. I know other cases of people that are in jail for
Yeah.
shooting at the police and they get 50 years. But here we have a policeman who literally murdered someone in 22 years and will probably get not even serve all of that for good behavior.
Right.
So yeah, I think we talked about initially of how the verdict went, how the trial went, how they had so many police officers basically breaking that blue wall of silence and telling this wasn't policy and all that, and how groundbreaking that was. As groundbreaking as that was, I think that the sentencing was kind of like a slap on the wrist, almost a slap in the face, because this one person is being punished per se, but it's not doing anything to send a message to the whole system. Because it's like, if you're a police officer, you murder somebody, you're only gonna get 30 years, depending on what state you live in. So it's kind of a small victory, but when you compare it to all of the other people who are in prison for way lesser crimes for more amounts of time, I think it again highlights the inconsistencies with our justice system.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. Hopefully he'll get more time in the federal cases. Like there's some, I think some
Yes,
civic
two more.
and federal.
Two more
So
cases coming.
Hopefully more time will be put onto that. So although he won't be serving the time for the murder, he'll still be serving time for all of the other charges, which I guess is a victory, I guess. But, again, there are so many people who are in prison for harsher sentences for lesser crimes, and I think that's an issue that we need to talk about. So
yeah. Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was reading an article that was saying that and I wish that I had that. Maybe when somebody else is talking, I can look it up. But that it was saying actually criminal justice reform advocates were hoping that the Chauvin sentencing wouldn't be extreme or at the full extent,
Right.
because of exactly what you're talking about, Chris.
Yes.
The fact that criminal justice reform advocates are trying to.
It's got to stop sending a message through sentencing. Right?
It's that, but also the sense of. I think it was less that and more about the fact that the criminal justice system is broken in the sense that people are serving these sentences that are way too long.
Yes, those have to go away.
Right. And so they're in the midst of them fighting against that. They're looking at Chauvin and they're like, hey, this could actually be a set of precedents that would extend beyond just Chauvin and police officers, but would extend to other people who have committed murder in the same way. And, the article went into, the ineffectiveness of long sentencing and things like that. So there is that perspective of even people within the, trying to reform the criminal justice system for the sake of people like your friend and people you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know, but anyway, just throwing that out. That wasn't necessarily my reaction, but that's a thought that people had.
I feel like I was watching a lot of commentary, watching and they have Van Jones on. I appreciate the sentiment. I can't say I know how it feels, right, because of all the privilege that I have in my status in life. But Van Jones said same thing that Chris said. I know people that are serving twice the time for half the offense, and that this was an opportunity to send a message. But that's where the brokenness in the court system is. And a lot of those verdicts that were extreme probably were sending messages. And that's the part I think needs to stop. There has to be some sense of return to jurisprudence, and that should be very objective and not subjective. And so I feel like this sentencing followed the guidelines. Now, if there needs to be a change in the guidelines, let's change the guidelines, right? Your friend should not be 60 years for riding in a car. Right. But let's change the guidelines. I feel like this judge did a great job of not getting drawn into the moment and really followed the law and chose not to be an activist, but chose to be judicious. Yeah. And I feel like that helps the system. He actually added, if I'm understanding it correctly, what he was convicted of, the worst of the three, he would have only been sentenced for, I think, 12 and a half.
It was like 14 was the guideline.
Yes,
Right.
and
Yeah.
the judge added 10.
Right.
He added a whole decade on top of that. So I feel like the judge worked within the legal parameters that were given, and that's actually a step forward in our we need reform.
Yeah.
We need reform. But I appreciate that it still feels inequitable. And why is it that a white police officer is the groundbreaking moment, right, of jurisprudence? It's
Right,
that in
exactly.
and of itself
Right.
is painful. It's painful to
Right.
watch.
And then
it's
to the,
painful to
even the
watch.
judge, he could have given like the max, but he didn't give the max because of some legal thing that they have in Minnesota where it could have been appealed. Basically, his lawyer could have been like, he gave him the max and you didn't have to, so we're going to appeal and get a lesser charge. It may have even gotten it reduced even more. So the judge
So
was smart
strategic.
Yeah.
with not
Yeah.
giving him the max, but giving him more than enough,
Yeah.
but not over enough.
And the
to make it
prosecution
stick.
only asked for 30,
Right.
which is significant.
Yeah.
Right. It was just 7.5 years short of what the prosecution
max
asked
was,
for.
Right.
And
Yeah, I wrote it down because I think we all watched it live, the sentencing. But
yeah, because we were trying to film that day.
yeah,
Right. And,
And
then
then-
it kept getting postponed and postponed.
yeah, the thing was long and intense. Maybe we can even talk about that. But
yeah.
I wrote it down. The judge said that the sentence is the product of a legal analysis. It's
Yeah.
not based on emotion or sympathy, not based on public
That's good.
opinion or political statements. And I was kind of researching and Googling afterwards because they kept using these phrases, aggravating factors and mitigating factors. And so it seems like, that 14 was the guideline, but then there were these aggravating factors. It was the fact that it was an abuse of power and authority. The fact that Chauvin is a police officer, and so he disregarded his training. Floyd was in his custody and care, and so he went against his training and abused his power and authority. The other aggravating factor was particular cruelty. The fact that it was how many minutes? Nine minutes.
Right, 9.
And then number 3, committed crime with a group. So there was a sense of collaboration, I guess, in it with the other police officers that also helped to pin Floyd down, and then that there were children present. So all of those things serve as aggravating factors that would add on to, or at least would justify adding on. But then there are mitigating factors, and I tried to Google like what the mitigating factors would even be, why it would be less than. But that makes sense, Chris, if it's a strategic kind of move that he's
I think
making.
mitigating is, does he have a criminal record?
Yeah.
His reputation as a police officer.
Right.
All of those
I
things
heard
could be
mention of that, yeah.
balance on the other side. Which, when you hear those things,
Right.
again, it gives me a sense of confidence in the legal system, right? That there is the possibility of fairness.
Yeah.
Which I still feel like, even though there are inequity and it's not equitable, and you hear certain stories and you're like, that's just absolutely atrocious, right? I feel like it's set up for fairness, and we need more judges like this judge to get there.
What do you think, Juice?
It's kind of when we had our previous conversation, it's like that glimmer of this is possible, and not despising the fact it's a humble beginning, like it says in the Old Testament, about something totally different. But just that idea, like, I don't want to like be a cynic about it, but it's also hard for me to like chalk it up as a success. Like, if this is the bar for a success, the bar is insanely high. It's nearly 10 minutes long, multiple witnesses, and then on top of that, a global civil rights movement, right? It's seemingly like this one verdict in this one case. And so I hesitate to say this is a success, because like that shouldn't have to be the bar. I would hope eventually, like you're saying, we get to a point where if somebody gets murdered on camera with all these witnesses, this conviction and sentencing, it's not historic, it's the standard. So I just driving the other day, I was just like, man, I feel like I have more faith in movements and marches. Or more, I guess, increased faith in that than I do the system. But it's this glimmer of hope. So just, praying into that, that it can be the start of something.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I feel I don't know. I was conflicted as I was watching it, but also and still, you know, I was like, I don't know if I'll resolve this by the time we shoot our reaction. But I feel the same kind of, you know, what you're saying, Fred. It's good that we have a legal system that has, like, when I hear him say legal analysis not based on emotion, right? It's like, okay, good, like
dispassionate. He used that word too.
That's a good word.
It should be dispassionate,
right? Like that's what we want, I guess, and maybe someone would argue differently from a legal system. But then the other side is like, but is this the person that we want to start that with, right?
Right.
Like because since like what Chris is bringing up, the fact that where has that fairness been historically for people of color? You know, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I have, to me, at the end of the day, I was glad that he didn't just get a slap on the wrist. He didn't just get a guideline kind of sentencing, but he went above and beyond. I really appreciated the fact that the judge took the time to say, to even though he said the sentencing wasn't based on emotion or sympathy or anything like that, before he gave the sentence, he talked about the Floyd family and what a travesty this whole thing was. And I even thought that was something when Chauvin was given the opportunity to share those sentiments. It's not something that he did, I don't think. And so yeah.
And it's hard I heard some legal analysis on that because he has a couple of pending trials.
Sure.
It was the right legal move for him to say nothing.
Yeah.
You know, because that could have been brought up in his next. So
he said
it's not the right human thing to do.
Sure.
But it was probably the legally smart thing to do.
And I think that's the rub, is like there's this humanity and then there's this, like, you know, when we're talking about judging people, that's really something we all know that God can do perfectly. Right. And so there's always going to be some level of subjectivity. And so as much as we can make the legal system objective, right, like the hope is that would be a good thing. Yeah. Because our subjectivity inevitably is always going to favor somebody. And and so we want it to be objective. The question is it really truly objective? Right. And, you know,
I heard some comments too in defense of the judge's decision, that a judge is not allowed to take into consideration what they may or may not serve based on good behavior. They're not allowed to consider when they might get out. They have to sentence them based on the parameters they have in front of them, because now you're anticipating a hypothetical situation. Right. So that was the judge can't say, okay, I'm going to add time because he might get out in 15.
Got it.
That would be an inappropriate. That would be a non-judicious decision, if that's the right word. Yeah. So I thought I had not thought about that before. Mm-hmm. You know, the implication of that, and that made sense. You know, to me there. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. It's at the end of the day, right? We can't lose sight of what you said, David, the human implications. Yep. A man died. And then this other man, Chauvin, just the fact that he was capable of doing what he did is hard to fathom. Yeah. Right. I want the court system to be dispassionate, but that doesn't mean that our reflection on it should be dispassionate. Right. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, I think even too, like, just kind of taking it theologically, and like where I've been thinking about this, even in terms of critical race theory and all of that, but thinking about how we as human beings, because we are subjective, have to approach, I mean, I guess, you know, justice dispassionately, but God doesn't. You know, like God is, the Bible talks about the wrath of God, right? Like that there is this passion to the justice of God. And even the Old Testament, you know, view of judgment isn't the same as American judgment, right? Like God is not a blind judge who, you know, our symbol of judgment of the justice system in America is like, that goddess. I think the statue is like of a woman who is blindfolded and was holding a scale and above the earth, and God isn't blind when he about justice and when he makes judgment. I was reading some stuff about, when you look at the book of Judges, for example, the whole book of Judges it's not about litigation. It's about passionate warriors who are defending the oppressed, right? And so there is a sense, even in the Old Testament tradition and the Christian tradition, that justice is not dispassionate, that justice has its eye in particular on the oppressed. But when you're talking about a secular government and society, how do we want that secular government to judge?
But isn't I'm not saying it plays out this way, but the blindfold is not about not seeing. The blindfold on the statue is about, I'm not going to treat you differently because of who you are. Justice is blind, it's my understanding, means that no matter who you are, you don't have privilege when you come into the system. Right. Now, we know that's not how it plays out. Sure. But that's the hope, right, of our secular system. And I think you could argue, which maybe that's another podcast for another time, because maybe this is a deep hole. Yeah. I'm not sure from a biblical perspective you can say that God treats everyone the same because of the concept of favor and the Israelites. Sure. Right. It seems as though he judged some nations and some people differently than he judged his own people. Now, I'm not saying we should aspire to that because we're not divine.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the rub.
But it creates an interesting conversation, doesn't it?
For sure. And not only Israel, but you think about, in so many places in Scripture, even Jesus quotes this out of Isaiah, the fact that God, what's that three? It's the widow, the orphan, the poor, right? Like God has a special interest for those people. Yeah. And so there is this sense that God isn't blind in the fact that, like, okay, everyone gets fair treatment. Fair or equal treatment. He's very interested in those who have been oppressed by the people who have power. And so but
he's perfect, so he gets to make the rules.
Exactly.
We're not perfect, so we should
So to me, I think that there needs to be a separation in terms of secular government between justice and activism, right? But it's the work of activism that has to hold justice accountable, or the justice system accountable.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, as we, I guess, wrapping up this portion, I think that it was a great move in the right direction, but like we may mention, we need to reflect on all of the things that led up to this. Right. We need to think about
absolutely
what if it's so many what ifs, and what if this wasn't? It's so many. What if nobody was there to record it?
I mean, the police report of what happened.
Yeah.
Nothing in terms of like what was on the video, what the witnesses
That's
said.
what I mean. So like,
if there's no witnesses,
if we didn't have that, and so many people, I've talked to many people who everything is the media's fault, and it's the media trying to control our minds, and social media is just tearing the world apart. But what if social media didn't show that video?
Yeah.
Would he have even been convicted? Would there would be no evidence for it. Another thing we got to talk about is, police reform. We need to talk about why those other officers didn't remove him off of George Floyd's neck. Yeah. Like, what was it about their training? What was it about their
culture,
allegiance, their culture?
Because I think the training said that they weren't supposed to do it, but their culture was stronger than the training, clearly.
Yeah, wow. Like we need to talk about that. Like, address this thing. So we celebrate.
That's going to be a good episode for a guest.
Yeah. I think we got some
Alvin Tatum
lined up. We got some kind of in
some others
in the wings.
Right.
Maybe a series of guests on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to hear that perspective.
Yeah.
And important to listen to.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. I mean, because if we don't understand those dynamics, then we're not going to be able to bring about the change.
Yeah, because people
we need.
might not know who you're talking about, but the people we're talking about bringing in are police officers.
Yes, so who we know. Who are
we want
devoted followers of Christ, people of great character.
Right.
And might not see eye to eye
Right.
in the way that we do.
Yeah.
Which is part of the one table.
Right. We want to have the conversation for sure.
So speaking of Juneteenth, that's why I'm not the flow master.
Right.
Grab the wheel.
Well, did you want to
go.
finish anything about that?
Not-
I know we want to do an episode on police reform, but was
Right.
there anything like a point you wanted to make before?
No, I don't think so. Well, I guess just last thing about the sending the message piece. My reference to that was
Yeah.
more so sending the message to law enforcement and people
Absolutely.
of authority. You're not going to be able to just get away with this and it be okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the part that I know me.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
part of the cultural change that needs to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like that needs
Fair
to
enough.
be like, hey, when you do this, we're not going to stand for
Yeah.
this. So that's why I know a person like me was looking for more of a harsher sentence
Right.
to send a message to that system. You aren't going to be able to get away with
Sure.
this in the future. We're going to stop this now, and you're not going to be able
Yeah.
to get away with that. So that would be the only thing that I would add to it. I think there needs to be more in-depth look at that, and let's address that so that in the future, when this happens,
Right.
you know, it'll be handled a little different. But yeah, that was it
No,
good.
That's good.
for now.
Yeah, I think so. You had mentioned social media and even media in general, just news, and that definitely plays into how we are reacting, how we are even thinking about justice, how we're thinking about the legal system and verdicts and sentencing, because to us, we know that it's not just a sentence, that it's going to reverberate and ripple out onto all the media and affect our culture and the way that we think about things. Similarly, Juneteenth has just
segue.
happened. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I got to do what I got to do. But it's a similar thing, right? Where maybe I mean, for me, it's been positive, right? Like whereas the Chauvin trial, all of that has been kind of weighing heavy above us on social media, in the media. We knew that it was coming. We've been hearing all of these things. Whereas Juneteenth has,
Yeah.
you know, we've been seeing Juneteenth in Newport News. We saw flags
Right,
out,
right.
like how they do for 4th of July and Christmas on the streets, you know, on the lights
Light poles and stuff. Yep.
yeah, we commercials, like you're seeing commercials for Juneteenth. Like there's definitely a sense of celebration that has not been felt outside of Texas nationally. And so this is arguably the first year that America has really recognized Juneteenth as a whole. And so I guess first let's talk about that. How do we feel about that? And then we can get into how we saw other people react.
Yeah.
So I don't know how y'all feel.
People
about it.
reacted.
Oh, people react, as they do, as people do.
Man.
Oh.
I think it was good for it to be nationally recognized.
Yeah.
However, I think there's a caution that we should have, because with anything, when it becomes a nationally recognized thing, you have companies who will, of course, monetize on it
Yup.
and reduce its importance to just a day off, to have a day of sale.
Right.
And two, I think it should give us pause to look at as to the timing of it, of making Juneteenth a federal holiday. So Juneteenth is made a federal holiday celebrating the ending of slavery officially in the
You
United
might as well
States.
say what it's about. Yeah, for
Right.
people that don't know.
But at the same
That's true.
time, so slaves weren't free by the Emancipation Proclamation.
Right.
Emancipation Proclamation was 1863. It took them 2.5 years for it to reach to Texas to let them know that they were free. And I'll go into that a little bit afterwards. Hopefully, I won't spend all the time talking about it.
And we can
Why-
post the link maybe to that video we
that's
used
true, too. Right.
also,
Yeah,
which
true.
is really good.
Yeah.
You
Why-
take the professor hat and you just you tell people.
Yeah.
Tell people what
so
it is.
you know, it took 2.5 years for it to reach Texas, and there are many theories about why it took so long. Whatever. But even what was known as General Order Number 3 was read by the general. Even some of that language was problematic, and I'll read a bit of it afterwards. But the thing that should give us pause is, it's when we celebrate some holidays, it sometimes can remove its significance and make it appear as if look at America, look at what we've done. We're making everything equitable for everybody, a performative act. So my point is the timing of making Juneteenth a federal holiday. Juneteenth is made a federal holiday while at the same time senators are voting against voting bills and creating more avenues of voter suppression, which affect Black people the more. So then you have, we'll give you a holiday, and you have people talking about CRT in institutions of education. The reason why we're commemorating Juneteenth then is to celebrate
the full history,
and
commemorate the full
but then
history,
you're going to ban talking about the thing that created racism. I mean, that created slavery. So it's like, we'll give you your little holiday, but we're not going to let you talk about it and teach about it in school. We're going to continue passing laws that are basically voter suppression, but we're going to give you your little holiday. So it's like you get the holiday, and then, of course, like I mentioned before, when you get the companies and media on top of it, it just becomes a performative act, and it lessens the significance of it. And we can,
but you're still for the holiday.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Of course. I mean, the holiday was always a holiday before it was a official.
Right, you're like, I was celebrating it.
Yeah,
right.
Sure. Yeah.
You're giving some caution though, and
I didn't need it to be a national holiday to celebrate. And I think that instead of it being, Jamar Tisby made a statement about, instead of it being more of a celebratory thing, it should be more we commemorate what it is, because that means that in the time of commemoration, you actually do some history and some learning what it really was about, instead of just celebrating it. Because when we celebrate it, we only want to talk about the glossy, the romantic side. But when you commemorate, there needs to be some time of lamenting.
Sure.
So I don't want Juneteenth to become just a mere celebration for everyone, because Juneteenth should be a time of celebration, but it should be a time of reflection and a time of lament.
Right.
To learn why this happened and who did it.
Because the Emancipation Proclamation was a declaration of liberty and freedom. It was not a declaration of equality.
It was not at all.
Yeah.
There was I think it's important that people understand the difference between this. Yeah. The movie, the most recent movie, Lincoln, that came out, not recent as in, but the last one that was made.
Yeah.
Is a phenomenal movie that really delves into that. I can't remember. Daniel Day-Lewis played Lincoln.
Yep.
It's a powerful film because they remind us that freedom and equality were two completely different concepts. Right. Even in the North, those that were advocating for the abolition of slavery, most of those were not advocating for equality.
Not at all. To go along with that, so I wanted to read the General Order number 3, so you can get an understanding of what I mean by, it was cool, but even in that, it was still some.
Right.
All right, so delivered by Major General Granger. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the executive of the United States, the president, all slaves are free, period. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection here, therefore, existing between them becomes that between an employer and hired labor. So now you're trying to tell me I was once your slave, and now you're going to treat me like a hired employee. Right. Now, where they do that at?
Right.
That ain't going to happen. Second, the freedmen, here it is, are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. Where is their present home? The slave plantation that they're on.
Sure.
So you're saying I should stay where I'm at and work for wages. Now, this man was just beating me for free, and now because of this order, he's going to start paying me wages. If he pays me wages, do you really think they're going to be equitable?
Right.
They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. So now you're saying we're not going to be supported in idleness, which is saying we can't sit around and be lazy. Now, when have we been lazy? These slaves, they just built the whole country, the economy. So now all of a sudden we're going to be idle and lazy.
Right.
So you're free, but we want you to stay in your place and don't make too much noise about this, and stay on that plantation and work for your master who's now your employer, who's going to hire you. Now, do you really think that a slave master is going to now pay a slave equitable wages? So yeah, you present this document that celebrates and commemorates Juneteenth, but even in that, there's still some parameter and still some shackle that's in there. So while we celebrate Juneteenth, yeah, but we weren't even really free with that.
Yeah.
Because even after that, so for those of you who don't know, after slavery, you went into kind of this Reconstruction period, sharecropping. And sharecropping was not fair either.
Right.
So, and then you go from sharecropping to Jim Crow to civil rights to war on drugs to here we are now. So were we ever really free?
I like those Juneteenth shirts. It's like free-ish.
Right. Yeah. So even in this, everybody gives all this accolade to the General Granger for coming and saving the black people, but he really didn't. He really didn't. He said, "You free, but we want you to stay where you at and don't make too much noise and stay here and work. And we're not going to let you go to the military post to get any help, because you don't have any homes. You live on a plantation,
Right?
So no, the government is not going to help you.
Sure.
And you better not be around making noise, and you better not be lazy."
Our family was just talking about a lot of people's pushback to Juneteenth, which I know we're going to get to, the hypocrisy of churches will do a Father's Day message, but they won't do a Juneteenth message. Right. And I was telling with them, I can't remember the timeline, but I remember when they're in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there was discussion about the establishment of Martin Luther King Day. And in Virginia, there was such pushback to that. I don't know if you remember this or not, but the original day was Lee Jackson King Day. They added Lee and Jackson, Robert E. Lee and Andrew Jackson, Confederate generals, to the day, and they forced a sharing of that.
Wow.
Which is,
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, isn't it? But this is part of my confession.
Yeah.
It wasn't crazy to me when it happened.
Wow.
Right. This is what we're working against.
Sure.
We are the product of what we've only ever known.
Right. Yeah.
How we've been raised, the environment. This is part of what we're talking about. Don't be a single source learner, right?
Yeah.
Don't live in an echo chamber. I shared this in my message on Saturday night, right? When you live in an echo chamber, the eventually you begin to call sin virtue, right? That's where you end up.
Yep.
And so it's going to take time to change the way people think when they've been enculturated for decades and for generations.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's almost like you need to be critical about theories on race, but we won't go there right now. We got to talk about that.
That's exactly what I was doing. The only way
we did that podcast already. It's dropping.
The only way that's going to be changed is if there are other ways of teaching history that are allowed to be taught.
I think it's interesting how you say it, because I do think every holiday in America kind of has its own feel. You know what I mean? And so we celebrate different holidays differently. And so, I was trying to think of like, what is a more somber, like, I mean,
Memorial Day,
like in
carries
church,
both a lament and a celebration,
right? Like in church settings, or like perhaps because I've never had a military family or even really been super close with people in the military in terms of like being in their space. But, I don't know if there's a lament kind of somberness to the way that they think about that day.
Right.
But most Americans it's a day
Cooking
off
out,
and we're grilling.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of attitude Juneteenth kind of takes on as we move forward. And we need people like Jemar Tisby to help us to understand. Like,
can you say that name? Jamar
Tisby.
Tisby.
He wrote The Color of
around here
Compromise.
Okay.
And
How to be an anti-racist.
How to fight racism.
Yeah.
Maybe some links in the
we'll throw
in the
those links in the
description.
comments.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
he said what?
speak.
Not celebrate, but commemorate.
Commemorate.
And I know for me, it kind of felt more like I was.
That's a great
I wasn't
line.
celebrating as much as I was observing. Like I went to celebrations that were hosted by Black people to observe and listen and see art, see some boxing, right?
Yeah.
All that. But I do think it's important to have time to reflect. And even you were talking about like teaching history. I think it's important that it's a national holiday because in terms of like the course of our nation, there's few more significant moments than when slavery was abolished. Now, again, there's all these different faces that it wore after that to continue. But in terms of the landscape of our country, I agree it should be national, and it's probably overdue that the Black community's been celebrating this for so long, but it hasn't been a community event. But then again, it's like when it's the community, right? It's people like me celebrating it. What does it look like?
Yeah.
Because I think you kind of hit on it. Sometimes we like to think like the Declaration of Independence was signed and then it's been like perpetual progress since then without reflection and even repentance for some of the things that went on. Like white supremacy was codified into law, right? There was there was economic
time and time
exploitation through chattel slavery. Like to think about that and sit in that. And then you realize the why Juneteenth is so glorious.
Right. And that's the thing. I think like for me, I was talking to my wife about this because, my wife is white. And so we were just kind of talking about like and then, our kids are mixed. And so it's like, how do we as a family celebrate? We had a conversation. She was asking like, should I be celebrating on Juneteenth or should I be, more commemorating? What should my posture be? What should my attitude be? In Texas, Black people have been celebrating Juneteenth for a long time. And because they know the history, there's more of a celebratory tone.
Right.
But at this juncture in our nation, right, how should the general population, how should white people, what should their tone? How should they commemorate or observe the day? Man. And I think like for me personally, I want to retain as much of the celebration of the holiday as possible because, something that I believe and I keep telling people is Black history is American history. Like
that's good.
We have to get to the point where when we think about our history, both the bad and the good, that we're able to share that both. Right. So I want white people to celebrate on Juneteenth. I want there to be fireworks and for there to be parades and stuff like that. But I think you touched on the juice. I want it to be led by Black people. And I want it to be a time where I feel like, of course, I say this, there's no way to actually, enforce this. But I think that you shouldn't be able to celebrate it until you acknowledge all of the history and the pain that led to it. And so for some people, I think for some time, it's going to be about commemorating first, observing first, understanding first, an opportunity for us as a nation in our schools, as Chris pointed out, for us to talk about it on the announcements, have bulletin boards, have special lessons in school where the true history is learned and talked about, the fullness of it, so that we can celebrate on the day.
Right. So why do we think, just kind of making a broad statement here, historically white evangelical churches are so comfortable with having parts of their worship services integrated with messages about mothers on Mother's Day, fathers on Father's Day, freedom on July 4th, but probably very few, if any, did a message that touched on Juneteenth, or at least an acknowledgement. Like we didn't do, we did a message on Father's Day, but we also gave time to Juneteenth at the beginning of our service. Showed the video, came and talked. We had a special musical special that so we did both together, I would say. But why do we think churches will continue to not do Juneteenth, but will continue to see the biblical significance of celebrating mothers and fathers and freedom associated with July 4th?
I mean, I think it's that video that we recorded already about Christian nationalism, that there's such an attachment in white evangelicalism to the nation. And then when you think about nationalism in America, it is essentially tied to white ideology. And so in order to celebrate, and that's why there's such a hesitancy in the Black community around holidays like 4th of July, because it's like, I am an American, but as I celebrate this nation, I'm not just celebrating the nation as it is today, you know what I mean? Or my part in my community, but also the ugly parts, and which involve and include white supremacy. So I think, anyway, that's to
that's good.
answer it kind of like more briefly. I think that white supremacy is tied up in, yes, even the culture of the church. And the church has been not only complicit in white supremacy, but has actually helped white supremacy exist in America even up until today. And so there are Christians who don't want to talk about white supremacy, don't want to talk about power dynamics, and because of that, they don't want to acknowledge Black history, because when you do, you have to acknowledge Black people, that our history is unique and the ugly parts of it. So,
and it's a great example of ethnic filters that we all have when we read the Bible. Right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
as a white person living in America, we've not ever been enslaved, right? Maybe you can trace back your history to Europe, fair enough.
Sure.
But in as far as in the modern history of America,
but not
right?
chattel slavery based on race.
Correct. And so when we look at biblical themes related to mothers and fathers, we connect with those biblical themes because the Bible has a lot to say about mothers and fathers. The Bible has a lot to say about liberty and freedom. Right. And so we connect with those. But as a white person, I don't really connect with the themes of the abolition of slavery and the equality of man, because that's all I've ever known, right? And so it's atrocious that I would accuse people of color of integrating secularism with Christianity with the insertion of Juneteenth, but yet I'll defend Mother's Day and Father's Day. Like we had a friend in a Facebook, when I asked that question, made the comment about, of course we're going to talk about mothers and fathers, right? And gave this long biblical response to. And our response back was, well, the abolition of slavery is equally a significant biblical theme. But you realize we don't see it. I'm going to say we, because I'm white, right? We tend to only see the biblical things that relate to our ethnicity, and that's why diversity is important. Right? We need other ethnicities to look at us and tell them the biblical themes that they see.
Yes,
and then we've got to make room for those in our worship services.
Yeah. Another just on that, and but let y'all talk about it. But
No, take it.
But a really great book on that as a resource is called Reading While Black by Esau McCaulley.
Wow.
It's really, really good, and he talks about everything that you just said.
My good friend Pastor Freddie Villarreal, shout out Freedom Life Church, great church in the 757 and Texas, in San Antonio. San Antonio. He said he was having a conversation with someone the other day. I've not thought about this before. And he said to that person, when we get to heaven, we're not going to speak English. and you could see this puzzled look on that person's face. Like, what?
Right.
Wow. And then Freddie being the jokester, he said, we're going to be speaking Spanish. But you realize, we're not going to be speaking English.
Right.
And I mean, it's probably going to be, I joked it's going to be Elven, right? From the Lord of the Rings. But it's going to be some heavenly language that we're all going to speak and understand. Or what we were talking about in our conversation is that it could be that we're all going to speak in our native tongue, earthly tongue. Like we'll speak English, and other people will speak their language.
It's like Pentecost.
But you'll hear your own being spoken. Sure. It will be like Pentecost, which could also be it. But the idea that everybody, like there's not going to be English classes in heaven for people who didn't speak English when they get there.
Right.
They're
not going to have to learn to speak like you.
Yes. Right. Yes. But
it's all you've ever known.
God help us and forgive us.
But what about you guys? How did you see other people reacting to Juneteenth? And then what were your thoughts?
I think it boils down to what Fred said. Like your question, why do you see pushback in the white evangelical church in America specifically, is because it's all we've ever known. Like you said, like as a white person, that's my identity. Well, my identity's in Christ, all that. But in my society and culture, I'm a white male. And so many of these holidays and things that go on orbit around my identity, I'm always included. And it's not that Juneteenth excludes me per se. I'm a part of American history. Black history is American history. Yeah. I'm just not at the center. I'm like Pluto, right? I'm kind of orbiting around it.
That's
and to
good.
be displaced like that, where like I'm not at the center and I'm not inherently included in this celebration as a white person, sometimes you see people like, is this racism? Like people who are this is a racist holiday, point blank, period.
Point blank.
It's like, is it, or is it just that we're uncomfortable not being at the heart of it? Like,
Right.
that, just because you're not the core of this celebration doesn't mean it's racist. You could, dare I say, celebrate with Black people.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
your brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah, that sentiment's based on the falsity that whenever we're elevating another, we
Right.
are devaluing someone else, and that's
so
just not
often,
true.
When you're here and you're a white male and others are being elevated, it feels like persecution or racism. We really know, like, we're just trying to even the scale.
We can elevate others without devaluing another. Right? We've got to find that.
And then to those people, it's like,
society.
it's a holiday that wouldn't exist without racism. So if you want to say it like that, but a racist holiday. That was the wildest thing I saw.
It brings to light our country's racism.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
some
I
people-
wanted to say it is a racist holiday because it's
pretty sure
pointing
you did
out
say
your
that.
racism.
I saw
All y'all are
It's
telling
pointing
on
out
yourself.
your racism.
If it was a tool this year, a lot of people told on themselves.
and the racism I used to have, right? This again is part of my ongoing confession.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jesus.
I just think that Juneteenth, it'll be our jobs to make sure that the holiday is commemorated and celebrated
Yeah.
the proper way.
Yeah, that's really good.
The true telltale sign will be Juneteenth 2022 because it'll be a whole year that it's
Yeah.
an official holiday. Companies will have time to get all of the
Coupon
mail,
codes.
all of the codes, all of the sales. So we'll see if our city does the flag raising ceremony and have the flags all week and have a whole week of celebration.
Sure.
We'll see if it's celebrated and not just tolerated and it ends up being diminished.
Yeah.
And it'll be up to us to make sure that people are educated about it. It's baffling to me how one of my daughters, her school, is having a whole week long this week celebration of 4th of July with coloring the flag and praising the flag and all of that. But nothing was done for Juneteenth at all. So when you start teaching kids that at age 5, and that is ingrained into them in the public school system, they become like many of us who wait till after college to find out the true history, unless you have parents like I am, who are telling my 5-year-old daughter, okay, this is what they teach you in school. However, there's another side to this. And getting them to know that now so that they change the generation and their generation is changed and more educated on the true history of the United States regarding Juneteenth and holidays of liberation.
I just had an epiphany here. Just the hypocrisy, right? That the white evangelical church that I was a part of for so many years. My wife Vanessa was telling me this story. We were laughing at it, but when you think back how sad it was, back when I was growing up, in the Halloween was a big no for Christians, right?
Oh my gosh.
Mike Warnke, if you remember that name, who turned out to be a fraud, right?
Wow, okay.
Was making bank by talking about, being a witch who'd been delivered, and he was like the Bernie Madoff of Christian testimony, right? It was all made up, but he drove a lot of that, right?
Wow.
And
Everybody had a harvest
and
festival.
you had a harvest festival. There was this huge protest against Halloween, and Vanessa told the story. She was just telling I don't remember why we were talking about it. She said she was at I don't remember what setting she was in, but her and her friend were sitting outside in the hallway while everybody else was in a room celebrating, having
at
fun.
school?
Yes. And, she went to a Christian school, so I was trying to remember the setting she was in, or maybe it was one of her siblings. I can't remember. But it was just her and another kid were sitting out there, and they were looking at each other like, it sucks to be a Christian, right? Because we don't get no candy, right? But this is the tragedy, is that there have been times where Christians will stand up with this incredible voice and sit their kids out and protest, but yet on things that I would argue, like for Halloween, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. There's demons are not taking over, right? Because we're
Because you put on a
trick-or-treating
Spider-Man outfit.
Correct.
Right.
Maybe we'll do a podcast on that. We say that 3 times every episode, don't we? So we know the Christian church, the white evangelical church, has this capacity to rise up with one voice.
Mm-hmm.
It just keeps rising up with the wrong voice on the wrong
Wrong
things,
times.
Right.
and is silent on the things that it should be
Right.
speaking up
That's true.
against. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're not Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't say that as a slight, but like for real, like we celebrate holidays,
Sure.
as Christians, and we don't separate ourselves from the culture.
Right.
And so if we're participating in our culture and other things, we need to figure out how we can do that in a way that, like you were saying before, pulls on the threads that are in Scripture. And I think, Juneteenth is a beautiful opportunity for us to
Yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
liberation, for
Yeah.
us to talk about grace and
Equality.
redemption and
You would
equality.
think we as the
and-
church have the perfect setup too, with the bad news. Man is falling, good news.
Wow.
Jesus
Come
came
on,
to save us. Like
right.
Wow.
the bad news.
We talk
makes
about
this
bad,
so
good news
right?
all the
You know,
time.
like
Mm.
Yeah.
you think we would be set up just to hit this one out the park?
You would think.
Right.
Oh Lord, well, grace to you if you are if you're listening and you're like,
Yeah.
dang, I'm a pastor or I go to a church and we did not celebrate or even talk about Juneteenth, or maybe you're a teacher and you're like, dang, I did not print out
Right.
a
Yeah.
coloring page for Juneteenth. There's grace. I mean, this is the first year, like we said, that as
Yeah.
a nation we've really done this all together and we're all learning
Right.
together, like Fred has shared so many times. So I think it doesn't change the fact that all of our statements and of how important that this is.
Yeah.
and why it's sad that maybe people have deliberately chosen not to. But if you haven't made a deliberate choice not to,
Right.
then it's not too late to make a deliberate choice to celebrate
That's good.
before 2022. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's good.
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I guess that's that, huh?
Yeah.
So,
Reactions. We'll just call it reactions. There's so many reaction
Reactions,
videos on YouTube.
and they're
now.
about to be about 4 books based on our conversation in the comments too. So scroll down and read those.
Yeah,
Right.
But I just think what we're doing here at One Table is just like Fridge say all the time, just a perfect model of when you don't know
Yeah.
and you are only surrounded by people who look like you, think like you, act like you don't ever learn anything.
Yeah.
So we just admonish everyone listening and watching. Surround yourself with some people who don't look like
Yeah.
you. If you're white and you had an issue with celebrating Juneteenth and you're a Christian,
Yeah.
find some black friends that you know and ask and talk and learn and educate yourself
Yeah.
on that, because that's the only way that we're going to learn is when we make efforts to get around a table and get uncomfortable and come with a posture of learning instead of approaching the table in a posture of offense. Come learning open, and I think that's how we'll
That's
get
good.
to a better place of everyone understanding. So reactions. Yeah, man.
Find your table. Right. That's what we're
For real.
saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
Find your table.
Invite some
Yep.
people to take a seat.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
good.
It's good.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you are listening through all of the ways that you can listen to podcasts, we're on podcasts through Apple and Spotify,
Everywhere.
So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.
Down at the table.
At the
Change.